In the dark room, the body of the middle-aged woman lies sprawled in a pool of blood on the floor. Next to her is a young woman, holding tightly onto a long iron bar still covered in blood. The blood stains cover almost the entire face, leaving only the woman's cold, piercing eyes visible. Her eyes stare fixedly at the victim beneath her, and she begins to pour gasoline over the lifeless body. The flames erupt violently, engulfing the unfortunate victim. The body of the woman starts to writhe, as if she is trying to escape death for a second time, but all efforts are in vain. Few people know that this horrifying scene is the result of a series of terrible tragedies between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Before coming to today's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the latest videos. On the narrow street of Gota, Gujarat, India, a man runs frantically in a state of panic, his back soaked with sweat and his breathing growing heavier with each step. His face is tense, his eyes full of worry, and his mouth incessantly murmuring prayers, hoping no disaster will befall him. It is Deepak, the man who has just received a strange call from his wife. Upon arriving home, Deepak frantically knocks on the door, but he is met only with terrifying silence. No one answers, and there are no signs from inside, increasing Deepak's anxiety. Unable to wait any longer, he decides to run to the neighbor's house and finds a way to climb through the window between the two houses to get inside. His heart races uncontrollably, and the premonition of the worst seems clearer than ever. As he enters the house, Deepak is suddenly frozen, his entire body paralyzed by the unimaginable horror before him. Mrs. 100 Rada, Drahan, you whine. Rika, Deepak's mother, lies motionless on the floor in a pool of dark red blood. Her body is partially burned, her face almost disfigured. Mrs. 100 Rada, Drahan, you whine. Rika's body is curled up, her face still reflecting sheer terror, and a glance is enough to understand the excruciating death she must have endured. The room is filled with the stench of blood mingled with the acrid smell of burning, forcing Deepak to hold his breath. Beside the victim, a long iron bar covered in blood lies scattered on the floor. Deepak collapses, his legs no longer able to support him. He clutches his mouth tightly, trying to suppress the rising sobs, his eyes frantically searching in despair. Then, his gaze falls on a corner of the bedroom, where his wife is huddled, trembling in the dark corner. Her eyes are vacant, dazed, staring blankly, as if unable to comprehend what has just happened. Deepak rushes to his wife, his heart overwhelmed with fear. He frantically looks at her, his hands urgently checking for injuries, and tries to ask her what has happened. But his wife does not respond, only sitting still, her empty eyes fixed on the body of her mother-in-law lying motionless on the floor. In the silence and gloom of the room, she suddenly bursts into mad laughter, leaving Deepak paralyzed, unable to understand what is unfolding before him. Then suddenly, as if awakening from a delirium, the young wife's laughter stops abruptly. She turns to look at Deepak, her eyes reddened, and her face transforms from a grotesque smile to one of utter despair. And as tears streamed down her face, she continuously told Deepak that she did not kill her mother-in-law. "I didn't do it. I didn't kill her," she repeated, as if trying to convince herself. Deepak felt his mind spinning, unable to comprehend what had truly happened in his own home. He tried to calm his wife and immediately called the police to report the incident. Within minutes, the police arrived at the scene, and the wailing sirens along with the flashing blue and red lights awakened the entire town. Neighbors began to gather, standing outside the house with curious and worried expressions. They looked at each other, chattering anxiously, trying to understand what horrific event had occurred inside the house. Deepak's home, once known as a model family in the neighborhood, admired for its warmth and happiness, had now become the center of an unforeseen tragedy. As the police conducted their investigation, they discovered crucial evidence. Blood-stained bed linens and clothing were collected and sent immediately to the forensic lab for examination. After a thorough examination of the crime scene and statements from Deepak, his wife, Nikita, was arrested at the scene. Her eyes remained vacant, empty, as if she had lost all feeling. All the evidence seemed to point to a horrific truth, but Deepak still hoped that it was just a misunderstanding, that his wife could not possibly be the perpetrator of such a heinous crime. Initially, Nikita was evasive, finding every possible way to deny her guilt. Her statements were full of contradictions, and she seemed to cling to any excuse to escape the truth. But after many hours of interrogation, combined with pressure from forensic evidence, Nikita finally broke down. She confessed to the crime, admitting that she had ended her mother-in-law's life in an uncontrollable frenzy. From this point on, the story of the tragic conflict between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law gradually unfolded, shocking everyone. Nikita Agrawal, 29, and her husband, Deepak Agrawal, had been married since January 2020. Deepak managed a well-known granite business in the area. From the outside, their marriage seemed smooth and perfect, but inside it was fraught with countless challenges, especially the strained relationship between Nikita and her mother-in-law, Mrs. Rika Agrawal. From the very first time Nikita visited the family, Mrs. C. Rika had shown her displeasure. Even without deep interaction, she opposed the marriage from the beginning. The reason she provided was extremely confusing and superstitious. She had consulted an astrologer who predicted that Nikita would be incompatible with the family. This worried Mrs. Rika, who believed that Nikita's presence would bring misfortune to her son and the family. Not only that, but the astrologer added a remark that further fueled Mrs. Rika's dislike for her future daughter-in-law. He said, "With such a charming appearance, Nikita will sooner or later betray her husband." These predictions seemed to pour oil on the fire, making Nikita feel a deep-seated anger. She knew she was not like that, and Deepak, Mrs. Rika's son, was her first love. Nikita had never acted in any way that would make others doubt her loyalty. She felt deeply insulted by the baseless predictions of the astrologer, but even more painful was that her future mother-in-law believed in them. The feeling of being misunderstood and unwelcome left Nikita deeply angered. In her frustration, she even decided to break up with Deepak, unwilling to enter a family that had prejudged her. However, what neither Nikita nor Deepak had anticipated was that Nikita was over a month pregnant at that time. This news complicated matters significantly. Although Mrs. Rika vehemently opposed the marriage, the prospect of a grandchild forced her to relent. Ultimately, Mrs. Rika had to accept her son's marriage to Nikita, but the relationship between the two women was fraught with tension from then on. Despite her deep grievances, Nikita chose to endure and became a daughter-in-law in the family. She knew integrating into a family with such entrenched biases would not be easy, but for the love of Deepak and their soon-to-be-born child, she decided to accept the situation. However, the initial wounds from baseless judgments and the pressure from her mother-in-law seemed to set the stage for a series of tragedies that no one could foresee. After the wedding, Nikita and Deepak moved in with his parents at their home in Godda, Gujarat, India. Both of Deepak's parents were in their 50s. Although they initially promised a harmonious household, the relationship between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law quickly became strained after moving in together. Arguments between Nikita and Mrs. Rika, which began with minor daily issues, escalated, creating a constantly tense atmosphere in the home. Even though Nikita was aware of her mother-in-law's dislike, she tried her best to prove herself as a diligent and respectful daughter-in-law. She always remained respectful towards Mrs. But no matter how hard Nikita tried, Mrs. Rika remained unsatisfied. The aversions she held from the beginning did not change, especially since she was still haunted by the fortune teller's words, who had planted the idea that Nikita would bring misfortune to the family. The enmity between the two women did not stop at minor arguments but gradually worsened over time, especially when Nikita became pregnant. Instead of being happy about the impending arrival of a grandchild, Mrs. 100 Radha, in the Drahan, Rika became more suspicious than ever. The rumors about Nikita's flirtatious appearance, mentioned by the fortune teller, began to deeply penetrate Mrs. Rika's mind, turning into an unshakable obsession. Rather than seeing Nikita as a model daughter-in-law, Mrs. Rika always doubted her character. Everything Nikita did seemed to be scrutinized through a lens of suspicion. What's worse is that this obsession did not just stop at doubting Nikita's character. In Mrs. Rika's distorted mind, she began to imagine baseless and negative scenarios. She believed that Nikita not only betrayed her son, but also had an improper relationship with Mr. Ramnivas, her own husband, and Nikita's father-in-law. This jealousy and suspicion were entirely unfounded, but they took root in Mrs. Rika's mind, causing her to gradually lose control over her thoughts and behavior. Every time she saw Nikita and Mr. Ramnivas in the same room, even in ordinary family situations, Mrs. Rika could not stop thinking about the terrible things she imagined. She even thought that the child in Nikita's womb might not be Dipak's, but the result of an incestuous relationship. These thoughts only fueled her hatred and aversion towards Nikita, creating an unbridgeable chasm. The suspicion and animosity deeply embedded in Mrs. Rika's mind, extending beyond mere gossip or daily observations. Whenever Nikita went out, Mrs. Rika would scrutinize her, trying to find something wrong to reinforce her distorted beliefs. She would even time each of Nikita's departures and returns, always keeping an eye on whether she came home early or late. Perhaps no one ever thought that a daughter-in-law would have to account for her schedule to her mother-in-law, but for Nikita, it was a necessity. Every time she planned to go somewhere or come home late, she had to provide detailed notifications, even presenting a daily timeline of her activities to give Mrs. Rika no reason to suspect. On days when unexpected work arose, Nikita had to prepare an explanation, and no matter how reasonable her explanations were, the feeling of being constantly monitored and doubted weighed heavily on her. She felt that she no longer had any personal space, as if she were imprisoned under her mother-in-law's watchful eyes. The situation did not stop there. Nikita gradually realized that her mother-in-law was not only concerned with the time she spent outside, but also rummaged through her private space. Many times, after coming home from a long day, Nikita discovered that things in her bedroom had been disturbed. With her tidy nature, she could easily notice even the smallest changes. At first, she thought she might have accidentally moved something, but after several occurrences, Nikita was certain that someone had been entering her room, and that person was none other than her mother-in-law. What horrified Nikita even more was discovering that her mother-in-law did not stop at rummaging through her belongings or controlling her schedule. She had even hired someone to follow her. Nikita noticed a stranger frequently tailing her whenever she went out. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but after being overtly followed several times, Nikita began to panic. She was so scared she wanted to cry, not understanding why she was being watched like this. And then, when she learned that the person following her had been hired by her own mother-in-law to spy on her, Nikita was utterly devastated. The feeling of betrayal and lack of trust from a family member drove Nikita mad. How could someone living under the same roof, who had spent so much time together, have no trust in her at all? Even though she had tried her best to fulfill the role of a dutiful daughter-in-law, dedicating herself to the family, in Mrs. Rika's eyes, Nikita was never accepted. Things seemed to get even worse when Nikita entered her 4th month of pregnancy. Mrs. Rika did not believe that the baby in Nikita's womb was Dipak's, her son. These thoughts were reinforced when Mrs. Rika discovered that Mr. Ramnivas frequently prepared nourishing soups and tonics for Nikita. In her delusions, she even secretly planned to eliminate the baby she deemed the sinful child. She tried every way to make Nikita take abortion pills without her knowledge. Every day, she covertly mixed medication into Nikita's food and drinks, hoping to destroy the baby in Nikita's womb as a way to eliminate what she believed was evidence of an affair between her husband and daughter-in-law. Fortunately, Nikita discovered this cruel scheme in time. When she noticed unusual changes in her body and became aware of the alterations in the food and drinks her mother-in-law provided, she began to suspect and decided to investigate. After learning and discovering that the substance her mother-in-law had been covertly giving her every day was abortion pills, Nikita was shocked and heartbroken. She was not only horrified by the grim reality, but also felt profoundly betrayed and enraged. Her mother-in-law, who was supposed to love and protect her during this sensitive time, was trying to kill her unborn child. Nikita's anger gradually built up into an extreme rage. In her fury and despair, Nikita was determined to devise a brutal plan to retaliate against her mother-in-law. On the evening of October 27th, after a tiring day at work, Nikita returned home, feeling exhausted due to the changes in her pregnancy. She wanted to quickly get to her room to rest, but as she passed through the living room, Mrs. 100 Rada, in the drahan, you whine. Rika stopped her. With a cold, disdainful look, she said she needed to speak with Nikita immediately. Despite her fatigue, Nikita could not refuse her mother-in-law. Reluctantly, she returned to the living room, sitting across from the woman who had caused her so much stress over the past months. Throughout the conversation, Mrs. Rika incessantly berated and interrogated Nikita about her daily schedule. She repeatedly brought up unfounded suspicions about Nikita's affair with Mr. Ramnivas, her husband. Each of Mrs. Rika's words was like a knife stabbing deeply into Nikita's heart, stirring up all the frustrations and anger she had silently endured for so long. Nikita bowed her head, remaining silent, her hands clenched tightly, trembling, as she tried to endure the harsh remarks from her mother-in-law. Mrs. 100 Rada, in the drahan, you whine. Rika did not stop. She continued to voice her suspicions that Nikita was having an affair, and insisted that the child in her womb was not Deepak's, but the result of an illicit relationship with her father-in-law. These words were the last straw, breaking Nikita's final patience. She had endured enough. All her efforts to remain calm had been crushed. Unable to contain her fury, Nikita suddenly lunged at Mrs. Rika, attacking her violently. In her rage, she grabbed a nearby iron rod and struck Mrs. Rika repeatedly on the head, face, and pelvis. The powerful and brutal blows from Nikita left Mrs. Rika unable to react. Terrified by the sudden attack, she panicked, trying to escape but was unable to. In her uncontrollable frenzy, Nikita continued her assault. She pushed her mother-in-law to the floor and kept hitting her on the head until Mrs. Rika lay motionless, with blood spreading across the floor. After Mrs. Rika had stopped breathing, Nikita doused her lifeless body with gasoline and set it on fire. The flames quickly grew fierce, consuming the entire corpse. The young wife watched the blazing fire with a strange sense of satisfaction. Around 8 p.m., while Deepak was engrossed in work at the office, he suddenly received a call from his father, Mr. 7 Ramnivas. His father's voice was filled with concern as he reported that neighbors had complained about hearing a violent argument between Nikita and Mrs. Rika. And wire, Mr. 7 Ramnivas, although at the hospital treating COVID-19, had been informed about the incident and urged Deepak to return home immediately to resolve the issue. He added that the neighbors had started to worry and warned that if the situation was not addressed, they would have to call the police. Deepak merely responded with an acknowledgement, knowing well that this was not the first time such a quarrel had occurred between his wife and his mother. The arguments between the two women had become so familiar that Deepak often ignored them, hoping that things would settle on their own. However, the tension in his father's voice and the warnings from the neighbors made him unable to be completely at ease. Nevertheless, Deepak still thought that the situation would not be too serious. Deepak decided to call his wife to check on the situation. He tried calling at least 5 times, but Nikita did not answer. The silence from his wife made him more worried. The sense of unease grew, and Deepak continued to call his mother, hoping she would pick up. However, this time, instead of his mother, Nikita answered the phone. However, this time, instead of hearing his mother's voice, Nikita was the one who answered. Her voice was trembling, interrupted, and filled with fear as she reported that Mrs. Rika was attacking her. Now, by Arkham. Before Deepak could ask more, Nikita suddenly hung up. The unease in Deepak's heart had now turned into real fear. He tried calling both his mother and wife again, but this time, neither of them answered. The silence from both ends made him feel that something was wrong at home. At this point, with no other option, Deepak hurriedly left work and rushed home, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding or a normal argument. By now, it was nearly 8:20 p.m. and Deepak rushed through the streets, hoping that things had not gotten out of control. But his intuition told him that something terrible was going to happen tonight. And just as he feared, when Deepak rushed to get into the house, a horrifying scene unfolded before him, turning all his fears into reality. Right in the middle of the floor, Mrs. Rika, his mother, lay motionless in a large pool of blood. In a corner of the room, Nikita, his wife, was also smeared with blood, sitting huddled and embracing herself in terror. Deepak felt his heart stop. The worst thing he had never wished for had truly happened. His mother was gone, and his wife, the woman he loved, was writhing in the aftermath of the crime she had committed. The once peaceful house had now become the scene of a bloody tragedy. Nikita was arrested immediately afterward and quickly detained, awaiting a fitting sentence for her actions. But perhaps the person who suffered the most from this tragedy was Deepak himself. Looking back, he could not help but blame himself. If he had acted sooner, tried to resolve the conflicts between his mother and wife instead of being indifferent and neglecting everything as he had before, this tragedy might not have occurred. The arguments and seemingly minor conflicts between the mother-in-law and daughter-in-law had simmered for months, but he had not realized their seriousness. Now, his mother was gone forever, and his wife, the woman he once loved dearly, had become a murderer. His indifference, hesitation, and neglect had contributed to an irreversible tragedy. Thank you for listening to today's case story. Don't forget to like and subscribe to watch more fascinating cases on our channel. At the age of 12, the son was only weaned from his mother, and at 15, he finally slept separately. Before that, he still slept with his mother, needing to rest his head on her and touch her chest in order to fall asleep. The spoiled brat's indifferent attitude, complete lack of remorse, and continuous troublemaking left society dismayed. The excessive pampering of the child makes any ordinary parent shudder upon hearing it. Many have questioned, what kind of family could raise a young man like this, so one of a kind? Perhaps the mother's distorted love is one of the reasons why the son later became a delinquent. The spoiled brat's indifferent attitude, complete lack of remorse, and continuous troublemaking left society dismayed. On a beautiful day, a major local television station announced a unique and captivating competition, a kissing contest for couples. The prize for the winning couple was substantial, up to USD, which attracted a significant number of participants. Among those participating were Anna and John, a couple who seemed as ordinary as any other. They took the stage with confidence, ready for the challenge that would last for hours. The crowd around them cheered enthusiastically, and the host continuously stirred up the atmosphere. Among the crowd, Anna and John stood out because they were not as shy as the other couples. They comfortably exchanged kisses as if they were alone. Hours passed, and while other couples had given up, Anna and John remained enthusiastic. Eventually, they won the competition. However, the joy of victory did not last long. As soon as the couple's names were announced, a strange silence fell over the entire hall. Laughter and applause gradually faded, replaced by astonished and disgusted looks from the audience. Anna and John were not an ordinary couple. They were mother and son, and this revelation shocked everyone present. Yet, despite the murmurs and whispers, Anna remained exceptionally cheerful. She thanked everyone, bowed, and then led her son away, as if what they had just done was completely normal. John showed no hesitation either. He smirked and, as he walked, wrapped his arm around his mother's waist as if she were his lover. Anna, born in 1962 in California, USA, is a woman renowned for her beautiful appearance. In 1999, at the age of 37, Anna married Richard, a famous actor and television host in the U.S. Their marriage was admired by many for being a perfect match and because both were prominent figures in society. After many years of waiting and effort, Anna had to undergo 3 rounds of artificial insemination before giving birth to her son, John. This child became the center of Anna's life, and everything she did revolved around indulging and meeting her son's every demand. The excessive pampering caused John to develop bad habits, such as dependence, arrogance, aggression, and domineering behavior. At the age of 3, when children begin to understand gender and the differences between males and females, most parents would train their children to sleep separately and avoid sensitive actions in front of them. However, Anna had a different view. She believed that maintaining the habit of sleeping together and engaging in affectionate actions with her son was normal and not wrong. Anna continued to pamper John to the point where, at 12 years old, he still hadn't been weaned. And by the age of 15, John was still demanding to sleep with his mother and maintained the same habits as when he was a child. In Anna's eyes, sleeping together and affectionate acts like touching her chest were simply ways to express love and strengthen the bond between mother and son. Every night, instead of spending time with her husband, Anna would go to her son's room, tell him stories, and lie down to hug him to sleep, even though John was nearly 20 years old. This not only reflected an abnormality in how Anna expressed her love, but it also led to more serious problems later on. When John began to experience natural physiological reactions in his body, Anna was aware of it, but her distorted love wouldn't allow her to distance herself from her son. It was only when Richard, Anna's husband, complained about the situation that Anna finally agreed to let her son sleep on his own. Anna, who had been deprived of familial love since childhood, tried to make up for it by dedicating all her love to John. She pampered her son with the most luxurious meals. In addition to 3 main meals a day, John drank goat's milk twice a day and enjoyed deep-sea fish and steak dishes. John attended an expensive elementary school with tuition fees up to USD per year, including subjects such as English, golf, and other aristocratic courses. Anna spared no expense to ensure that her son had the best conditions to grow and develop, but all her efforts led to the opposite result. Perhaps it was because Anna frequently told John, "Wait until you're 18, and you'll be completely free," that as soon as he turned 18, John decided to study abroad in England by himself. However, no one could have predicted that this study abroad trip would mark the beginning of a horrific series of tragedies for Anna's family. Without his mother's strict supervision, John gradually lost control. The freedom of life in England, without Anna's protection and management, led him into depraved habits. John began to get into trouble at school, frequently skipping classes and immersing himself in endless parties, late-night gatherings, unclear relationships. His reckless lifestyle was only the beginning of the sad events that would follow. One fine day, John returned to the dorm with a calm demeanor, carrying a large black bag in his hand. His face was expressionless, showing no sign of emotion. His roommate, sitting on the sofa with his eyes glued to the TV, happened to glance at the bulky bag John was carrying. With a curious look, the roommate asked what was in the bag. John turned to look at him, then gave a sly half-smile. In a calm voice, John simply said it was just some of his toys. The roommate laughed, thinking John was teasing him again, but for some reason he couldn't shake a feeling of unease, even though he couldn't explain why. The black bag seemed too big, too mysterious. However, the roommate just shrugged it off, as John had always been known for his strange jokes. John walked straight into his room and closed the door. In the silence of the room, the only sound was the steady unzipping of the bag. From inside the large black bag, terrifying objects began to emerge. There were guns, ammunition, and a few sharp knives. John looked down at his toys, his eyes gleaming strangely. That evening, as the two sat in the room, John turned to his roommate with a tone that was half joking, half serious. He told his friend not to go to school on May 1st. Curiosity was written all over the roommate's face as he raised an eyebrow and asked why. John glanced at him, then gave a creepy smile and coldly replied, "If you want to stay alive, don't go to school." John's words sent a chill down his friend's spine, a strange and uncomfortable sensation running down his back. But then, John suddenly burst into laughter, patting his friend's shoulder as if he had just told a funny joke. His friend let out a sigh of relief, assuming it was just another one of John's sick jokes like always, and didn't pay much attention. He shook his head, thinking John was merely trying to scare him for fun. However, for John, it was no longer a joke. In his mind, a twisted plan had already begun to form. That day, John's school was hosting a large charity event. A cheerful atmosphere filled the campus, with students and teachers eagerly preparing for the evening's program. John entered the school, moving silently like a shadow among the crowd. Unlike every other day, today John wasn't with his friends. He carried a large black bag, filled with what he called his toys. No one paid attention to John, nor did anyone question the strange bag he carried. They were too busy with their work, their excitement and joy, completely unaware that a nightmare was about to unfold. John stopped at the entrance to the auditorium, where a large group of students and teachers were gathered, preparing for the event. He stood there for a moment, his eyes gleaming with a mysterious and sinister look. Like someone surveying the scene, he silently observed the environment in front of him. The radiant smiles, the joyful faces, none of them had any idea that their peaceful moment was about to be stolen. After watching for a while, John slowly stepped inside the auditorium. He closed the door behind him, but this time, instead of leaving it open for people to come and go, John quietly locked it. John slowly placed the black bag on the floor, his hands trembling, not out of fear, but excitement. Why? He carefully opened the bag, then deliberately pulled out a gun, the deadly toy he had prepared in advance. No one in the auditorium noticed John, as they were too absorbed in their tasks. In fact, no one even turned around when John raised the gun toward the sky. That was until the sharp crack of a gunshot suddenly shattered the peace. Everyone in the auditorium was startled in horror, their eyes darting toward the source of the sound. John stood there, gun in hand, a cold smile on his face. In an instant, the peaceful atmosphere was replaced by chaos. Screams filled the air as people realized the terrifying situation unfolding before them. But before anyone could react, John lowered the gun, aiming it directly at the crowd, and began firing wildly. Bullets whizzed through the air, the deafening sound of gunfire echoing around the room. With each pull of the trigger, another person fell, blood splattering, and their screams of agony echoed throughout the auditorium. The scene was straight out of a horror film. John stood blocking the door, which had been locked tight. The crowd, frenzied with panic, screamed in hopelessness, but no one could find a way out. Every path led back to John, where his gun continued to spit out bullets without pause. Only when the gun in his hand ran out of bullets did he finally stop. Immediately after the horrifying incident, the school reported it to the police. The investigation team quickly conducted a search of John's residence, and the findings shocked everyone. In John's cramped room, police discovered an enormous stockpile of weapons, enough to equip a small arsenal. It wasn't just a few guns. The amount of weapons and gear John had hoarded far exceeded anyone's expectations. Among the items discovered were bulletproof vests, protective masks, specialized gun mounts, earplugs used to block out noise when shooting, and a torture device called a garrote, commonly used for executions by hanging during medieval times. Additionally, the police found thousands of loose bullets, a homemade 9cm handgun, and a crossbow with extremely lethal power. These discoveries shed more light on John's twisted mentality and meticulous planning, marking him as someone with antisocial tendencies who is willing to cause a tragedy. The lead investigator in John's case publicly shared with the media that, in his 54 years of service and dedication, he had never encountered such a terrifying case. He admitted that he had never faced someone not only equipped with dangerous weapons but also harboring such an extreme anti-social mindset that it was hard to believe. With actions that led to serious consequences and threatened many lives, John was sentenced. However, even though the sentence was handed down, the trauma he left behind for the community and those who witnessed it would never be erased. What was even more shocking was not what John had done, but the attitude of Anna and her husband after learning their son had been imprisoned. Instead of feeling remorse or shame, they blamed John's school for being meddlesome, claiming it was the reason their son ended up in jail. Anna and her husband continually defended their son with biased comments like, "He's such a kind boy. He's just a child," as if everything John had done was merely a minor mistake of an innocent child. Their blind love didn't stop there. To get John out of the police station, Anna and her husband spared no effort in using all the connections and money they had. They hired the best lawyers, and throughout the process, the couple constantly lamented that they were worried to the point of graying hair about their son's future. To them, John wasn't a criminal, but a victim of misunderstanding. Their blind love became a shield for John's cruel actions. Not only that, to gather enough money to post John's bail, Anna and her husband had to sell their house, liquidating all their assets to save their son. But after successfully getting him out of police custody, the family felt neither shame nor regret. Instead, they continued to display their arrogance as they had before. Anna and her husband had no hesitation in flaunting their unreasonable protection of their son, as if their family was still the center of attention. When John was escorted back to the U.S., a crowd of reporters and the media surrounded him, recording every moment. Instead of remaining silent or remorseful, Anna shouted angrily, "What are you doing? Stop taking pictures. Your cameras are hitting my head." Her words reflected not only her anger, but also her contempt for everyone around her. As for John, he didn't show the slightest bit of remorse for what he had done. When he was led through the crowd, John neither bowed his head nor showed any sign of regret. Instead, he smirked, his cold eyes sweeping over those watching him. Without a trace of guilt, he widened his eyes in disdain, as if the entire ordeal had been nothing more than a game he had won. You would think that after such a horrifying incident, John would change and turn his life around, but no. Instead of learning from his mistakes, John sank deeper into a life of depravity and indulgence. He had no intention of reforming. On the contrary, he arrogantly declared, "I'll live off my parents for the rest of my life because working is too exhausting." This statement caused public outrage and disgust, viewing John as a parasite, irresponsible, with no sense of independence or maturity. In 2019, once again, John's name appeared on the headlines, but this time not for violent acts or reckless antics, but for another scandal tied to his scandalous personal life. Everything began when a well-known hot girl on social media suddenly accused John of irresponsibility after she discovered she was pregnant with his child. The story quickly stirred public attention, as the girl not only accused John of refusing to take responsibility, but also exposed his indifferent and disdainful attitude throughout the ordeal. According to her account, their relationship initially started as a casual fling, with no strings attached. The two met through lavish parties, where alcohol and stimulants were everywhere. However, just a few weeks into their relationship, she found out she was pregnant. Instead of panicking, the girl believed this news could help their relationship go further, and she hoped that John would take responsibility for the child she was carrying. But her hopes were quickly dashed when she broke the news to John. Rather than being confused or worried, John responded coldly, showing no concern. He flat out denied being the father of the child, and even reacted with anger and disdain when asked to take responsibility. John mocked her, calling it a cheap scam, claiming that she was only using his name for attention. John's words were like a dagger to the heart of the young girl, who had trusted in a relationship she once thought had a future. His scorn and belittling attitude not only humiliated her, but fueled her determination to expose the true nature of John to the public. By sharing her story on social media, she hoped everyone would see the real face of the man many had once admired. The incident quickly spread across various media platforms, and once again, the public was in an uproar. However, when asked about her son's incident, Anna remained indifferent, showing neither concern nor remorse. The woman even told the media, "It's just because my son is too handsome that he became a target." Anna's blind protection of John only deepened the public's disappointment. Instead of confronting the truth and helping her son correct his mistakes, the mother continued to enable John's wrongful behavior. This overprotectiveness from Anna caused John to sink further into a cycle of mistakes. Her indulgence only made him more rebellious, contemptuous of others, and increasingly arrogant. As for Richard, Anna's husband, he could no longer tolerate their wayward son and a wife who continually covered up John's every mistake. The tensions had been mounting, and ultimately, Richard decided to file for divorce. The news of their split quickly stirred up public attention. Anna publicly declared that she had been abandoned by her husband, but everyone knew the real reason was rooted in their unruly son, John. Richard had reached his breaking point, as Anna's misguided love for John had become so blinding that it drove their family into tragedy. But that wasn't the end. In April of that same year, John was arrested 3 times in Thailand under alarming circumstances. He was caught breaking into a local's house, stark naked and completely out of control. In an even stranger turn of events, he reportedly picked up a sofa and used it to wipe his face, an extremely bizarre and terrifying behavior. Upon investigation, the police found that John had been using illicit substances, rendering him completely incapable of controlling his actions. Though Anna was accustomed to her son's criminal behavior, this time, she couldn't just stand by and watch. Without hesitation, she flew to Thailand to bring John back home. With her instinct to protect her son at all costs, Anna continued to have John treated in a psychiatric ward and enrolled him in a rehab program. In front of the media, Anna appeared devastated, sharing that she nearly collapsed upon seeing her son's condition. As for Richard, the father who had once placed so much hope in John, he had now all but given up. After witnessing John's repeated downfalls, Richard no longer held any expectations that his son could change. Despite Anna's numerous pleas for Richard to come to Thailand to help their son, he steadfastly refused. Richard was exhausted and had lost all hope, no longer believing in the possibility of John's redemption after all the harm he had caused. Anna's actions, rooted in her blind love for her son, sounded a strong warning to the world about the importance of raising children properly. Overindulging a child, giving them everything without setting boundaries or clear limits, had warped John's psyche. That child grew up suffocated by protection, without the personal space to develop a healthy sense of self. This lack of freedom not only made John dependent, but it also fostered a distorted personality, one incapable of taking responsibility for his own life. The story of Anna and John's family serves as a painful yet crucial lesson for all parents. Loving your child is natural, but if that love is misplaced, it can become the very source of tragic consequences. Thank you for listening to today's true crime story. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to catch more gripping stories on our channel.